I never imagined that a simple stack of papers would shake my entire perception of my family. It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon, and I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table, sifting through some old documents. My dad had asked me to help him find some tax forms from a few years back, so I rummaged through a drawer filled with folders, receipts, and random papers. That's when I saw it, a neatly labeled folder with my younger brother's name on it. Curious, I pulled it out. My brother, Daniel, was 6 years younger than me, still in college, and always seemed to have things a bit easier. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was some school paperwork or medical records. But as I flipped through the pages, my stomach dropped. Inside the folder were multiple bank statements. At first, the numbers didn't register in my mind. Then, I saw the total balance. Over $100,000. I blinked. That couldn't be right. My parents weren't wealthy. We were a comfortable middle-class family, but this kind of money wasn't just lying around. I scanned the pages again. Monthly deposits, savings bonds, even a small investment account, all in my brother's name. A lump formed in my throat. I quickly shoved the papers back into the folder and closed the drawer. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. A million questions raced through my mind. Where did this money come from? Why was it all for Daniel? And the biggest question of all, why wasn't there a savings account for me? I sat there for a moment, gripping the edge of the table, my mind reeling. Had my parents secretly favored Daniel all these years? Was I just blind to it? Memories flashed through my head, times when they had helped him out with tuition, co-signed his car loan, and even covered his rent when he was between jobs. I had always thought they were just being supportive, but now, it felt different. It felt calculated. Just then, my mom walked into the room. "Find anything?" she asked casually, pouring herself a cup of coffee. I hesitated. My first instinct was to shove my emotions down and pretend like nothing had happened. But the words slipped out, before I could stop them. "Mom, does Daniel have a savings account?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. She glanced at me, her expression neutral. "Of course. Why?" I swallowed hard. "How much is in it?" She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. That hesitation was all I needed to confirm what I had seen wasn't some mistake. She knew and had chosen not to tell me. "Why are you asking about that?" she finally said, stirring her coffee. I felt the heat rise in my chest. "Because I just found the paperwork. And I want to know, do I have one too?" There was a silence. A long, heavy silence that told me everything before she even opened her mouth. Her eyes darted to the drawer, realizing exactly what I had found. Then, with a careful voice, she said, "We can talk about this later." But I wasn't about to let it go. "Why not now?" My voice was sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. "Is there something you don't want me to know?" She sighed, rubbing her temple. "It's complicated." I felt a lump in my throat, a mixture of anger, confusion, and hurt. "Then explain it to me." And at that moment, I knew, whatever answer she gave me next would change the way I saw my parents forever. My mom's hesitation spoke louder than any words she could have said. That single moment, that pause before answering, made my stomach twist. I wasn't a kid anymore. I knew when someone was hiding something. She finally exhaled, placing her coffee cup down on the counter. "It's not what you think, sweetheart," she said, her voice calm but careful. I felt a sharp sting in my chest. "It's not what I think. Then what is it?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Then explain it to me." She glanced toward the living room, as if checking to see if my dad was within earshot. "This isn't a conversation we should be having like this," she said quietly. "Like what?" I shot back. "Like two adults? Because that's what I am, Mom. And I think I deserve an answer." Her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the gears turning in her head, calculating how much she should tell me, what version of the truth would cause the least amount of damage. Finally, she sighed. "We started saving for Daniel when he was little, after he was born." I frowned. "And you didn't do the same for me?" She hesitated again. "We did. At first." The words "at first" sent another wave of confusion through me. My voice was quieter this time, almost afraid of the answer. "What happened?" Before she could respond, my dad walked into the room, flipping through a stack of mail. "What's going on?" he asked, not looking up. I turned to him, my hands clenched into fists. "I found Daniel's savings account." His fingers stopped mid-page turn. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to mine. Mom shot him a warning look, but it was too late. The air in the room had shifted. He knew I wasn't going to let this go. Dad cleared his throat and set the mail down. "All right," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Let's sit down." That's when I really knew. This was bigger than just a savings account. We moved to the living room. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows on the walls. I sat on the couch, my parents across from me, looking more uncomfortable than I had ever seen them. Dad spoke first. "We didn't want you to find out this way." My heart pounded. Then how was I supposed to find out? "Were you ever going to tell me?" He sighed. "We always planned to, but we didn't know when the right time would be." I folded my arms. "The right time? The right time for what?" Mom finally spoke, her voice soft. "When you were little, we did start saving for you, just like we did for Daniel." She paused. "But things changed." A knot formed in my stomach. "What changed?" They exchanged a glance. Dad cleared his throat. "When you were about 10, we had some financial trouble. I lost my job for almost a year, and things got really tight. We had to use some of the money we had saved for you just to keep the house." I blinked, processing his words. I remembered those times. How we cut back on eating out, how Christmases were smaller, how Mom started working longer hours. I had always thought it was just a rough patch. I had never considered that they had dipped into my savings. "Okay," I said slowly. "But that was years ago. If you used my savings, why did you start one for Daniel later?" The room fell silent again. Mom's fingers twisted together in her lap. "Because by the time we got back on our feet, you were already older. We thought you'd be okay. You were working, you were independent, but Daniel was still little. We didn't want him to struggle like we did." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "So you just decided I didn't need one?" My voice cracked. Dad looked down. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" I asked, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you made sure Daniel was taken care of and just hoped I'd figure things out on my own." Mom wiped at her eyes. "We never wanted you to feel like this." "But I do," I said, my chest tightening. "I feel like you chose him over me." "No," Dad said firmly. "We love you both equally." I let out a bitter laugh. That's easy to say when one of us has a six-figure savings account and the other has nothing. The words hung in the air, heavy and unmovable. Dad pinched the bridge of his nose. "We thought we were doing what was best at the time. We didn't think." "That's the problem," I interrupted. "You didn't think about how this would make me feel." They both looked at me, guilt written all over their faces. I stood up. I couldn't sit there any longer. "I need some air." Before they could stop me, I grabbed my coat and walked out the door, stepping into the cool night. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing. Everything I had believed about fairness, about how my parents treated me, felt like a lie. And I wasn't sure how I was supposed to move forward from this. The cold night air stung my skin, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing, replaying everything. My parents had just said they thought I'd be okay? That was their excuse for not saving for me? For not even telling me? I walked aimlessly down the street, my breath visible in the crisp evening air. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I knew it was either my mom or dad checking on me, but I wasn't ready to face them again. Not yet. After what felt like an eternity, I found myself in front of my best friend Jake's house. Without thinking, I knocked on the door. Jake opened it, immediately frowning when he saw my face. "Dude, you look like you just got hit by a truck." "What happened?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Something like that." He stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. "You want to talk about it?" I hesitated. Did I? The emotions were so raw, so tangled, but I couldn't hold it in any longer. So, I told him everything. The savings account, the way my parents justified it, how I felt like I didn't matter as much as Daniel. Jake listened, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to anger. When I finally finished, he shook his head. "That's messed up, man." I exhaled sharply. "Right? I mean, am I crazy for being this upset?" "Not even a little," he said. "Look, I get that parents make mistakes, but this isn't just a mistake. This is years of decisions that kept you in the dark." I ran a hand through my hair. "That's what hurts the most. It's not just about the money, Jake. It's about the fact that they didn't think I deserved to know. Like my future wasn't worth planning for." Jake leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. "Man, if I were you, I'd be questioning everything right now. I was. More than I wanted to admit. Silence stretched between us, and then Jake sat up suddenly. You know what you should do? I sighed. What? Talk to Daniel. I blinked. Daniel? Yeah, Jake said. Does he even know about this savings account? I opened my mouth to answer but stopped short. Did he? Jake smirked. Exactly. You don't know, which means there's a good chance he's just as clueless as you were. I frowned, thinking it over. Daniel and I were close, or at least, I had always thought we were. He had never bragged about some secret savings account. Never made me feel like he was being treated differently. What if he had no idea? I grabbed my phone and hesitated for just a second before texting Daniel. Me. Hey, can we talk? A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Daniel, sure. Everything okay? Me. Not really. Can you meet me at the diner? Daniel. Be there in 15. I sighed, slipping my phone back into my pocket. I had no idea how this conversation was going to go, but I needed answers. Facing my brother. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in a booth at our favorite diner, nursing a cup of coffee. Daniel walked in, scanning the room before spotting me. He slid into the seat across from me, setting his phone on the table. Dude, you're being all mysterious. What's going on? I took a deep breath. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. His brow furrowed. Okay. I hesitated. Did you know Mom and Dad have a savings account for you? Daniel blinked. What? I studied his face, searching for any sign of guilt, but he looked genuinely confused. They've been saving money for you since you were a kid, I said. For college, for a house, for whatever you need in the future. Daniel frowned. I always assumed they were helping me out with college, but, wait, are you saying they don't have one for you? I let out a bitter laugh. No, they used to, but they stopped when I was 10. And they never told me. Daniel sat back, rubbing his hands together. Wow, I didn't know. I crossed my arms. So they never mentioned it to you? No, he said, quickly. Then he hesitated. Wait, maybe once? I tensed. What do you mean? Daniel chewed his lip. A couple years ago, Mom mentioned something about making sure I had enough saved for when I moved out. I didn't really think about it at the time. I scoffed. Of course they made sure you had enough. Daniel looked down at his hands. Man, I don't know what to say. I had no idea they did this. Silence stretched between us, and for the first time, I realized. Daniel wasn't the enemy. He wasn't some spoiled little brother hoarding money that should have been shared. He was just as blindsided as I was. He sighed. Look, I get why you're upset. If I were in your shoes, I'd be pissed too. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I don't get why they didn't think I needed it. Daniel hesitated. Maybe they thought you'd be okay because you're the older one. The responsible one. I shook my head. That's not an excuse. I know, he said. Softly. And I think you need to tell them that. I exhaled slowly. Yeah, I do. The anger was still there, but it was shifting. It wasn't about Daniel. It was about my parents. About their choices. And I knew that if I wanted closure, I had to confront them. This time, with no room for excuses. I stood outside my parents' house, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was it, the moment I had been dreading but knew was inevitable. After talking to Daniel, I realized I had been angry at the wrong person. He didn't know. He wasn't the one who made this decision. My parents were, and I needed answers. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the front door. The familiar scent of home-cooked food filled the air, but for the first time in my life, it didn't feel comforting. It felt suffocating. My parents were sitting in the living room, watching TV, looking completely at ease, like nothing was wrong. Like they hadn't just shattered my trust. My mom looked up first. Oh, honey, where have you been? You didn't answer my calls. I clenched my fists. How could she act so normal? Dad muted the TV. Son, sit down. We need to talk. I scoffed. Yeah, we do. I walked over but didn't sit. I needed to stand. I needed them to see how serious this was. Mom shifted uncomfortably. Listen, we know you're upset. Upset? I let out a bitter laugh. That's an understatement. Dad sighed. We never meant to hurt you. Then why did you do it? My voice cracked. Why did you save money for Daniel but not for me? They exchanged a look, and I felt my stomach drop. There it was again. That silent understanding between them. The one that kept me in the dark for years. Mom was the first to speak. Honey, we knew you would be okay. I shook my head. You keep saying that. What does that even mean? She swallowed hard. You've always been independent, smart, hardworking. We knew you'd find your way. But Daniel, he's different. He needs more help. I let out a sharp breath. So you're saying you just assumed I didn't need the same security? Dad ran a hand through his hair. We made the best decision we could at the time. We had limited resources, and we had to prioritize. I stared at him in disbelief. So you prioritized Daniel over me? Mom flinched. It's not like that. Then explain it to me, I challenged. Because from where I'm standing, that's exactly what it is. Silence. And then, something shifted in my dad's expression. A flicker of something deeper. Regret. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Son, when you were little, we actually did start a savings account for you. I frowned. Yeah, until you stopped. He nodded. Because at the time, your grandfather got sick. We had to use most of our savings to cover his medical bills. We thought we'd be able to rebuild it, but then Daniel came along, and, well, things got complicated. I swallowed hard. So you just gave up on me? Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Her face crumpled. Sweetheart, it was never about giving up on you. It was about survival. I let out a shaky breath. I wanted to understand. I really did, but the truth still hurt. So all these years, you couldn't have told me? You let me believe we were all treated the same when we weren't. Mom wiped her eyes. We didn't want you to feel like we failed you. I let out a hollow laugh. Well, guess what? You did. The words hung heavy in the air. Dad sighed. We should have told you. That's our mistake. I shook my head. It's not just about telling me. It's about the fact that, at the end of the day, you made a choice. And that choice wasn't me. Tears welled up in my mom's eyes, but for the first time in this conversation, I didn't feel guilty. Because I deserved to say this. I've spent my whole life trying to make you proud. Trying to be the strong one, because that's what you expected of me. But I needed support too. My voice cracked. I still do. Dad looked away, shame written all over his face. Mom sniffled. I wish we had done things differently. I exhaled slowly. Me too. Another silence stretched between us, but this time, it felt different. Heavier. Because now, the truth was out in the open. And none of us could ignore it anymore. The silence in the living room felt different now. Heavier. Not just because of the truth that had finally been spoken, but because we all knew. Things wouldn't be the same anymore. I looked at my parents, their faces lined with regret. I could see it now. They weren't just parents who had made a tough decision. They were people, flawed and trying their best, even if their best had hurt me. But that didn't mean everything was suddenly okay. I let out a slow breath. I don't know how to move on from this, I admitted. I don't even know if I can. Mom wiped her eyes. We don't expect you to forgive us right away. Dad nodded. We just want you to know that we love you. We always have. I wanted to believe that. And maybe, deep down, I did. Nung love wasn't just words, it was actions. And their actions had told me, over and over again, that I was the one who had to fend for myself. I wasn't angry anymore, just exhausted. I stood up. I think I need some time. Mom's face fell, but she nodded. Of course. Dad looked down, his hands clasped together. For what it's worth, we're proud of you. We always have been. I swallowed hard. I had spent so much of my life chasing those words. And now that I heard them, they felt hollow. Because what I had really needed all along was their support, not just their pride. I nodded, but I didn't say anything. I wasn't ready to give them that relief. Not yet. I turned to leave, but just as I reached the door, my dad's voice stopped me. We're going to fix this, he said. I turned back, doubtful. How? He took a deep breath. We're not sure yet, but we will. Mom stood beside him, nodding. We don't want this to be the end of our relationship. We want to earn your trust back. Something in my chest tightened. Because that's what I had needed to hear. Not excuses. Not justifications. But a real acknowledgement that what they did had hurt me, and that they wanted to make it right. I didn't know if they could. But at least, for the first time, they were trying. I gave a small nod. I guess we'll see. And with that, I walked out the door. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't okay yet, but I would be. Because now, I wasn't just the forgotten child. I was someone who had finally spoken up for myself. And no matter what happened next, That was a step forward.